We keep trying new things here on Chris and Company, and I think that we deserve a little bit of credit for that. Last show, we interviewed two people who played Sparty, and today we are going to have on Josh Rosen. I make this joke the second our interview starts, but not to be confused with the former quarterback who went to UCLA. You've seen this guy. If you don't know the name, you know the face, and you probably know the impressions. He is a wonderful impressionist that you have seen all over social media, all over Twitter, all over TikTok, doing various impressions of our commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, other former politicians, but a lot of sports figures. Mainly the Skip Bayless impression, I think, is like his fastball. The Skip Bayless impression to him is like what the John Madden impression was to Frank Caliendo, where it's like, that's the one that you go to. But I've been scrolling through his page for several weeks. The guy makes me laugh a lot, does a lot of stuff in person, going to somebody dressing up as Donald Trump is just funny to me. And then you couple that with the fact that he does a good impression. He's going and ordering, food at a restaurant. That's all funny. And, I've said before, I'm always really fascinated by comedy. We've had Josh Potter, the comedian, on, and the world of impressionists. I bring this up in the interview, but the first comedy CD I ever owned was Frank Caliendo. I kind of grew up on the master of impression. So really interested to hear about his journey and have you guys hear about his journey. I think one thing that we have the opportunity to do with this show is kind of get a kind of inside the actor's studio of content creators. I think it's a really unique lane, or journalists or athletes or anybody. Like I am, I try to be very inquisitive with the questions I ask. At Castellani 2014 on Twitter, CastellaniContent.com is getting updated every day with the content that Austin and I create and put out. Last time I can promote this, if you're watching this on Friday, June 6th, that means tonight is the watch party at the Lone Goat, Tigers Cubs. It's finally here. I can stop annoying you with my promotion. And follow us on all platforms. We continue to grow, and I appreciate your support. And with the interview show especially, like I said, we keep trying to do new things. So let's just jump right into it and get to our interview with Josh Rosen. Josh Rosen joining the podcast today, and I'll get the joke out of the way because I'm sure it's been made at your expense a million times. Not to be confused with the quarterback. Okay, we're done. Yeah. Now, in fairness, professionally, you've probably been more successful than he was, considering what happened to him in Arizona. So you're off to a good start there. You're ahead. You're ahead in the Josh Rosen power rankings.
Yeah, I would say I've moved ahead of that Josh Rosen.
Yeah, yes. But You've seen him on TikTok. Wonderful impressionist, and I've always been a big fan of impressionists. In fact, I was actually thinking about this last night. The first comedy album I ever owned was, I can't remember the name, but it was Frank Caliendo, like back in
Caliendo, yeah.
Of course, right, like back in the Frank TV days. So we're talking like 2007, 2008 era, and I'm sure like he's obviously like the kind of the king of modern impressionists in many ways. But I want to get to know a little bit about how this came about, because what's weird about social media and what's weird about TikTok especially is that you're nowhere and then one day you're just everywhere. Like all of a sudden you're on somebody's For You page. So I guess how long had this, you posting these impressions videos been going on before you saw like a real kind of uptick in production and overall like viewership?
Well, I was doing it for a while, but I wasn't getting much traction, which I guess is how everyone starts.
Yeah.
And then I started posting a Skip Bayless impression, and that's the one that just took off. It started going viral, specifically on Twitter about 3 years ago, and then people started following me because that impression. I guess because no one's ever imitated Skip before successfully. I mean, people have tried. I think Caliendo tried to do it, and a couple others. So like just the newness of like, wow, somebody can actually imitate Skip Bayless. That's the impression that about 3 years ago just took off for me.
It's funny because I remember there was an interview. There was one time Caliendo went on First Take with Stephen A. and Skip, and they asked him to, as they do, like ask him to impersonate both of them. And he said, like, I can't get Skip Bayless down. And it's funny because the guy's he's been on TV for 20 plus years. I mean, I'm like going back to the ESPN like cold pizza days when he was on with Woody Page, like that,
Yeah.
so, and yet he's not as imitated as many of the other people that you see. And I want to just ask you about, generally speaking, what your opinion is of him, because it's so weird, because I think he's kind of starting to fade a little bit at this point. He's off Fox, but he still remains a remarkably polarizing figure. And I still can't make up my mind of like, how much of this is performative, how much of this is trolling, how much of this is, real, like his actual opinions. He's been it, in terms of doing his job, which if his job is to get people to react and be polarizing, he does that in spades. Do you view him as somebody who is a like I don't know. I don't want to be too mean here, but do you view him as a reliable source, or is it more so like just he's a source of entertainment?
You know, I've studied Skip a lot, obviously, and I truly believe he believes everything he
I
says
think so too.
and that he's not trying to be performative. He does come up with like nicknames and stuff
Mm-hmm.
that are entertaining. So he's aware of what he's saying, but I truly believe he's not just saying it for the clicks, like some of the wild opinions he has. He really believes, Tim Tebow could have been the greatest quarterback, Johnny Manziel, like he believes everything he says. The trolling of LeBron,
Mm-hmm.
like I think he was doing that before people were doing trolling.
Yeah.
So I truly believe that's his personality type. He's very stubborn. He believes what he believes, and as a comedian, he's the perfect character to imitate because he encompasses like every funny character trait. The way he moves, the takes he has. It's like if you're into sports and you're looking for like a parody of someone, he to me has everything.
Yeah. And the first thing you get down with him, which is not something that I noticed, I think this is a sign of a great impressionist. It wasn't something I noticed until you started doing it, is the bounce. It's like getting in the chair right before he speaks, which is something that and then the heavy sigh. When doing an impression, whether it's Bayless or not, are you, the way, waving the finger on, regardless of what impression you're doing, is the first thing you try to get down the voice and then you focus on kind of the physical mannerisms, or is it you want to get the physical mannerisms down first, or does it
Not
vary?
not totally. It can vary. Okay, so like with Skip, like I've gone back a few years. If you can even see videos of me doing Skip a few years ago, and I didn't have the voice as good as I do now.
Yeah.
So for him, it was more the mannerisms first, and then the voice. Because the thing with doing the voices, like even the great voice impressionists, you have to practice it a lot to get it
Mhm.
like precise. So sometimes like with Skip, I figured out the other stuff first, and then I started to get into his voice more. But then there's other characters like Mad Dog. With him, it's voice more,
I would agree.
than the mannerisms. So it kind of depends on the person.
Yeah, it's and Mad Dog is one. I'm from Michigan. You probably tell from the background here. I have a major affinity for like that era of New York sports radio and New York sports radio in general. Like that. I'm sure you probably follow that Funhouse Twitter account that posts
Oh
like
yeah, I follow
sprinkles.
it.
I'll laugh till I cry, like watching some of those and that era. And it's just you're right. Bring it up with Skip, who's obviously probably a bigger national figure, but like that Russo especially, I mean, I think was a guy that was impersonated before like impersonations even became a thing on social media, just because Mike and the Mad Dog was such a huge show. This is a question I've wanted to ask impressionists for a long time, but it's funny because what guys who do stand up, like they guys probably, it starts with people telling them they're funny, they go on stage and then they start doing their act and they kind of work it out. With the impressions, what came first for you? Was it the realization that you were good at impersonating people, or was it the want to do impressions, if that makes sense? Like it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing, but did you know that you were a good impressionist before you started kind of on this journey, or did you say to yourself one day, I want to see if I can workshop this. I want to be somebody who does impressions.
Yeah, I knew I had it early on. Cause like when I was a kid, I used to imitate some of the sports broadcasters like
Mhm.
Marv Albert.
Yeah.
Yes, it counts, and the foul. And people would give me immediate feedback. They're like, "Yo, that's spot on." And so, but the thing that I always worried was like, okay, because like from a comedy standpoint, I always want to. It has to be funny too.
Hmm.
Like you can do an impression. There's impressionists out there who aren't necessarily comedians, but for me, I wanted to have it both, where like Caliendo, where it's like you're laughing not just because he's got John Madden spot on, but the material is really funny.
Yeah.
So that took me a little bit of like time to workshop that part.
Yeah. I'm sure you've been asked this question before, but are you aware of anyone who is not a fan of the impression that you do of them?
I think Skip's not a fan.
Oh, really? You see,
Now,
I don't view yours as like in fairness, I don't view that impression as particularly disrespectful.
no, I'm not being disrespectful, but I kind of got a sense from because I have heard from some people that he's seen it, and he won't acknowledge it. Um, and I think he won't acknowledge it because well, I think one of the reasons he won't acknowledge it is because a couple of years ago on his podcast, he actually said he didn't think anyone could imitate him.
Oh, okay.
Before I really went viral with it, he said that, and so I think part of it's like his ego, like can't admit that he's got him down. But I think he doesn't like it. But we'll see.
Yeah, it's weird how that works because and I my following is much smaller than the people I'm about to mention. But like, if somebody were to come out and do an impression of me, regardless of even if it was me, I'd be like, dude, this is cool. Like somebody took the time to like study. But there's been a few guys like Kyle Dunnigan, obviously, is a wonderful impressionist who posts on he's on social media all the time. He does stand up. He's been on Rogan several times and Bill Maher hates the impression that he does
I've
of,
seen that.
yeah, and like to a point where he basically like they start playing it, he does everything except cover his ears. Like
Yes.
it's a weird like he just says it's terrible, like it does an awful. It's weird how the different vibes you get where and I guess going back to the thing about Skip, I never view that impression or really any of them as disrespectful necessarily, but when doing an impression, you do have to you have to study somebody. You have to study their voice, to study mannerisms. Do you feel like you need to have, in order to really get it down, some level of respect for the person that you're impersonating, or does it really not matter for the name of comedy?
I don't know that you have to have that you have to have respect, but you have to be interested in the person.
Yeah.
So for me, like everyone I imitate, I am deeply interested in. Like they fascinate me. Their personality interests me. Their opinions on things interest me. And that's I think probably the most important thing, more so than like do I respect or like this person's like opinions and stuff. Because like I do imitate some other controversial people
Yeah.
in the sports world and politics, like Trump, for instance,
Yeah.
and doing Skip Bayless and Trump. Again, I don't know. I don't agree with them on everything, but like they fascinate me. So
Yes.
I'm going to study the heck out of them.
Yeah, it's weird, and we'll talk about our fearless leader in a minute. I did have some questions about him, but it is interesting where even like the people that truly can't stand him can't even acknowledge like he's wildly entertaining. Like I can't like he's there's a reason he's the most imitated human being like on the earth.
Yeah.
Like he is one of one, and that's why so many impressions of him I find to be hilarious. One thing about and I've always been a big fan of comedy, but one thing I find interesting about kind of the current age that we're in now is with this TikTok generation is that I feel like long form comedy is not as I'm gonna say not as relevant, but it's harder to pop off with long form comedy than it's ever been because people consume things in a shorter manner. And I think like the stuff you do on TikTok is a great example of that, where people come on, they watch a minute, they laugh their asses off, and then they're scrolling to the next thing. Do you feel like it's harder to make it in comedy now because people might have a certain perception of what you do based solely on a 1 minute impression as opposed to, and I don't know if you have like an act necessarily, but I feel like there's certain comedians who've had to struggle with this where they come to a show expecting something that's going to kind of hit you in the face right away. And then it's more of a long form storytelling thing that you can't really have on a TikTok screen.
Yeah, I kind of, and I do have an act for the stage too, although sometimes like I have to adjust it because I know that I have to hit the audience right away.
Yeah.
And they don't have patience, for sure. We're definitely in that era where it's like, yeah, like nobody really wants to watch. Even the comedians that people love, they don't want to watch an hour of
Yeah.
stand up. They want like quick hitting. They want
Mhm.
like I mean, I've seen great comedians like that I've opened up for that have a like I think they're phenomenal, but like they lose the audience after like the first 15 minutes.
Mhm.
I think that's because of the TikTok social media. Like everything is a quick hit now, you
Yeah.
know. So I mean, for me, I do try to shock the audience at first. Like I like to come out in character a lot. I enjoy coming out in character as the president or Skip Bayless or whomever, just as like a shock to the audience. They're like, "Oh, this is something different."
Yeah. What's the first professionally? What's the first impression that you remember being like, I can take this on stage. This is going to work.
Um, I was doing President Obama
Mm.
actually for a while. Yeah, like when he was president. I
Yeah.
think I started like senior year of college, right after. I started doing President Obama, and I also had some sports people at the time too. I would do Dick Vitale, and I had him like ordering a baked potato or something like that. I'll tell you what, I want the loaded baked potato, cheese, bacon, sour cream. It's gonna be awesome, baby. And then I would have like Obama, I don't know, talking about healthcare, Sesame Street, Wall Street joke, something like
Yeah.
that. Um, and those were like some of the early ones that hit pretty well.
So how long had you been doing this, on stage before like the social media stuff really became a thing?
Probably like about 10 years ago I
10 years?
started. Yeah. It's just like I hadn't really figured out social media for a while. Like I would post, but I didn't really know what worked on there. And um, until like I see the sports world kind of embraced what I did, which I really
Yeah.
appreciate. Because it's like Caliendo had his niche was the sports, doing
Yeah.
the sports people, and for me, that's kind of been what's helped me is like finding an audience there, as opposed to just like, oh, it's another guy imitating the president.
And you bring up the sports world, and there's a lot of things I want to talk about, but especially with sports figures. I feel like in the last, and maybe it did start with Caliendo, like sports broadcasters and sports figures are more imitated than they've ever been. And
Yeah.
do you think like that's just because the market exists where we can post stuff on social media more frequently, or do you feel like people like because of how much exposure these guys get, we just have a better sense of their personalities and it's just more fun to impersonate them than it's ever been?
Yeah, I think they're just on more than ever.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's like, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the guys too. I've done some skits with these guys from Last Take. Have you
Mm-hmm.
seen them?
Yeah, I've
They,
seen them. Yeah.
yeah. So, and they do like Shannon Sharp and Kendrick Perkins and Stephen A. Like Stephen A. Smith has become um, more popular than a lot of the stars.
Yeah.
Like and Mad Dog too now because he's on with him,
Mm-hmm.
and Nick Wright, who I imitate a lot. Like
Yeah.
these guys are like as popular or even more popular than like some of the top players. And I think it's because there's just the programming has gotten excessive and it's just they're always on.
Yeah. I would argue it's almost in a bizarre way. They're like the new game show hosts where it's like you with I remember back when Will Ferrell would do Alex Trebek on SNL. It was like people found that so funny, one because Will Ferrell's great, but two because like they saw Alex Trebek every single day. Like you go to and sometimes you even if you try to get away from it, like I'll go to the gym and it'll be like Fox News, MSNBC, and then First Take, and you just you're so used to. And I also think and another one too is that coaches get more shine than they ever have. I feel like coaches and broadcasters, like Nick Saban's just like on national television now. And I feel like back in the day it used to be, okay, there's a former player who's now an anchor. This guy does, color commentary. Now they're like full on personalities. It's kind of they've taken on this celebrity status that's a bit more bizarre.
Yeah,
Uh,
100%.
is there an impression that you do that you really like but never use on stage because it's so obscure?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of the sports ones. Unless I don't have a sports, if I don't have the right audience, they won't get some of the sports impressions that I do.
Mhm.
Like I mean, I love imitating Nick Wright
Yeah,
and Chris Broussard.
yeah,
And by the way, they're awesome. I've met both of them, and they enjoy the impressions that I do,
yeah.
and they can laugh at themselves.
Hmm.
But yeah, like if I don't have like a sports demographic audience, and I start imitating Nick Wright, the audience isn't going to know who I'm doing.
Yeah,
You
I've heard
or
a lot of good things about Nick Wright as a person. Everyone says he's
Yeah,
pretty.
he's a really nice guy. Like he's not like I respect the guys who don't have that big ego. They can laugh. I'm not saying that they don't, with their takes they always think they're right, but like they can laugh at themselves at the end
Yeah,
of
I
the
mean,
day.
it's got to be a prerequisite if you're going to be a public figure and you're going to have the boisterous like personality that you have. There's going to be imitators and even positive ones. Has there been a point, because you just mentioned it, where you were on stage and you realized like I'm doing this is not a sports crowd, and you were kind
Oh
of like,
yeah.
and you had to pivot from doing those impressions?
Yeah. I was doing a broadcaster who I like to imitate, Kevin Harlan.
Oh yeah,
And it was just an older crowd, and I don't know. I thought the bit was funny, but they didn't get it because it just like they didn't even know who I was imitating.
that's interesting because I don't know. Maybe it's tough for me to put myself in a world where people don't consume sports just because that's all I do. So it's like the idea of not knowing Kevin Harlan's voice is crazy to me. But you move around long enough, maybe you end up finding a crowd. When you study certain figures, whether it's political people or sports figures, what have you, do you also study other people's impressions of them or do you feel like that you run the risk of potentially watering down your own impression?
Sometimes I will look. Yeah, I see what they're doing. Like I become aware of like, okay, this is how they're approaching it. But sometimes they bring out like something in the person that I didn't necessarily see.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't overdo that though, because when I'm working on an impression though, I don't do that. I only do that like after I've gotten the impression where I think like down, because I want to still get the impression through my eyes. Like how do I take the person? How do I get the person down? I still think my process is the best one for me, but after I feel like I've gotten someone down, sometimes I'll be like, oh, that's interesting how Dana Carvey imitates Joe Biden.
Mhm.
I notice he does the thing with his eyes,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think I bring this up before, and we'll transition to talking about Trump here in a second. But I recently watched, or I guess it wasn't that recently now, the Apprentice movie that came out last year where Sebastian Stan played Trump, and it was a weird thing because it was an amazing performance, I thought, but it by an impersonation standpoint, it didn't hit the beats that you would expect it to hit. And I think
Yeah,
a big part of it is whether in real life or people doing him, so much of Trump is comedy. It's just big and like, he just gets all boisterous and he loves to talk to the crowd. And it's like you have to, for the sake of comedy, kind of make things broader in
yeah.
a sense. And so maybe it's tough to find that line between perfectly subtle but not too subtle. But I want to ask about the Trump stuff because I know there's obviously been a million guys who do Trump impressions, and I've heard some different stories about some things they've experienced. And one thing I think that separates you is that like you've gone out in public with it, not just on stage, like ordering in restaurants and stuff like
So
that.
you see some of those, yeah.
Oh yeah, and I remember a few years back. I don't know if you remember this show. It wasn't on that long. There was a show on Comedy Central called The President Show. Anthony Atamanuik played Trump on that show. It was only ran for about like
Oh, I
it
think
only
I
ran
know the guy. Yeah,
yeah, it only ran for about a season and a half. But I remember he did an interview where he said, "When I go out in public as Trump, I provide like this level of catharsis because people know that it's not the actual Trump. So whether it's unbelievable praise or unbelievable criticism, people feel like they can come up to me and say whatever they want because they can get away with it. Have you had any bizarre experiences like that where people try to talk to you or maybe even criticize you as if you are the commander in chief?
Oh yeah, all the time actually, and I do like a lot of the places I go to regularly, like Dunkin' Donuts and stuff. They actually call me Mr. President a lot of times, even when I'm not in character, and then I just have to respond as the president. But yeah, like it's definitely cathartic. Like, and I don't even ask people what their politics are. Like, I'm just like, I just do it obviously for the entertainment aspect, and I just take the thing that I like doing with Trump is like taking because he exaggerates everything, right, which makes
Right.
it funny. But I like being in the moment. So like if I'm interacting with an employee at Dunkin' Donuts, I like to talk about them as Trump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's the thing I noticed, and the other thing that because he's always in sales mode whenever he speaks, so it's like he
Yeah,
always talks things up as if they're greater than they are. Like I remember, and you captured this with the milkshake line. I remember, but when do you remember when Clemson football won the national championship and
yeah.
they went to the White House and the government was shut down, so they just had a ton of McDonald's, and he went there and spoke and just couldn't stop hammering home how many French fries. There were so many French fries, so many burgers. Wonderful. You go ahead and do it.
They're really tremendous. We've got more milkshakes and more French fries than anyone in the history of our country. And by the way, this wouldn't be the case if Biden was president. Believe me, okay?
It's always sales mode with him, which I do like. I just, as a fan of comedy, I just find funny. I mean, whether it's I agree with policy or not, I just laugh. Is that one though? Because like everyone, and this existed before he was president too. Everyone does a Trump. Like it's he's like I said, he's probably the most imitated like celebrity there is. Did you feel obligated to learn Trump when he was like in political office, being like, dude, I feel like I don't have my fastball if I can't do a Trump, that type of thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And also I felt that was one I had to get down like as close as I could to the actual thing because I know that like there's hundreds of other Trump impersonators out there, and a lot of them are really good. But like mine has to be pretty spot on to separate myself in any way. So I put a lot of focus on that, and also like I think about what makes my Trump different. Um, well, one, like I'm willing to dress up as him with the wig,
Yeah.
which a lot of people aren't willing to do. I'm half the size of Trump, which makes it funny too. A guy that is Skip Bayless's size doing a
Mhm.
Trump impression and then also doing the sports takes as Trump is a
Yeah.
unique angle that like I haven't really seen anyone do like Donald Trump commentating a sports game. So I
Mhm.
was like, yeah, you know what? That's a funny approach to it.
Yeah, and it was so unique in the because like people forget sometimes they didn't with the last guy, which I understand, but people forget with like Trump's 80, so like he was during the election cycle, he was going on these like sport like these hip podcasts like the Bustin' with
Yeah,
the Boys and like Theo
yeah,
Vaughn, yeah, and they were like and they were trying to like get him to talk sports and during certain, and it's just like he has a casual knowledge of it, but again, he can't admit that like he might not be 100% on something. So he's selling like, oh man, I've been watching the 49ers, Brock Purdy, it's unbelievable story with that Purdy. So yeah, it's endlessly fascinating. I've seen a lot. I saw an interview with Caliendo a long time ago where he said like he alluded to the fact he wasn't this bitter, but he alluded to the fact that he kind of got tired of being in interviews and instead of getting asked legitimate questions, just kind of being told like a wound up toy, just being like, go do impressions, just to do impressions. Do you ever get tired, maybe not of doing them, but of feeling like, when you're in an interview situation, or maybe people run into you on the street that it's, hey, go perform, type of thing. Just because it's like, if you're an athlete, if you run into Saquon Barkley, you're not going to ask him to run a 40. But I feel like when people run into a comedian, it's like, go do the impressions. Does it ever get a little bit exhausting or is it always fun?
sometimes a little bit. If it's like I don't mind doing it for people, but sometimes I wish they would like look at me as like, hey, hey Josh, like call me by
Mm-hmm.
my name, like I'm not always like in character,
Yeah.
So it would be nice sometimes, like if people just acknowledge, like, hey man, I've seen your work, like you do a great job, and then they can say, do you mind doing the Skip Bayless real quick?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it, that's a better approach than just like, yo, do
Yeah.
Skip Bayless, you know?
Yeah. Do people just ever call you Trump? Like, hey, Trump, what's up? Or hey, Skip.
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
I've had the Mr. President thing. I was at Jimmy John's like a couple weeks ago, and like some guy was like, "No way, the Skip Bayless guy is here," you know. And then it was
Yeah.
like, and it was fine though, you know. But like, then it was like I had to stay in character the whole time.
Yeah. It's one of those things like you count your blessings. Obviously, like so much of the content I make is around Detroit sports and the Detroit
Yeah.
Tigers. So if I run into somebody in public, they ask about the Tigers. And it's like, dude, I have no problem. Like that's totally fine. At the same time, even as much as I love sports, there will be some moments where it's like, all right, just like I need a minute. Like I saw today's game, I get it. And also I think especially like with comedy, like there's probably there's other things that you can bring to a stage and like as a performer, just being a naturally funny person. Like, does it ever, I don't know, maybe scare isn't the right word, but does it ever maybe worry you of like just being known as impressionist guy, or do you feel like that's a good place to be?
No, I'm okay with it because as long as like I'm being true to myself with the impressions because the thing is too like everyone that I imitate as I said actually interests me and I find the funny in them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like as I'm doing Skip or whomever it's like I'm finding the humor in it in my own way too. So it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like I'm just like a guy who's just doing impressions. I feel like I'm showcasing like a lot of what I like to do as a comedian.
Yeah. And it speaks to something you brought up earlier, like there's doing impressions and then there's doing impressions and being funny. Like there's a
It's
huge
different
being
ball game.
being funny is not an easy thing. Like, and being it's just not like I guarantee you every friend group has that guy who they say, man, you're funny, you should go be a comedian, and then they go on stage and they have to eat shit for 2 hours.
Bomb.
It's a completely, and that's why I respect comedians so much. Is like, is so much of your art is you bombing. Like great comedians is like, having to deal with criticism and the uncomfortability that comes with it. It might be a little bit different with impressions just because that's something that you've honed for a longer time. But even that, we kind of talked about it earlier, like with you being in a crowd where maybe they weren't as familiar with the sports stuff. It's like, you got to pivot, you just learn and you have to eat.
Yeah, you pivot. I mean, like I have found though that like what works for me on stage is fun. Like a lot of times the audience is with me because I do think the great comedians, you're laughing at them almost as soon as they walk out on stage
Yeah.
because they just have like a funny presence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like their faces they make are funny, the way they talk is funny. So I think that like that's a place you want to try to get to that I try to get to where it's like the audience, you have the audience regardless.
Yeah.
Not everything kills, but they're on your side.
And the fact is, especially if you're in an environment like that, like people are coming to laugh. Like it's not, you're not going and doing material at a morgue. Like there's people who are there, like you're in a comedy setting. You come in, I think, with the predisposed expectation of being like, I hope that this guy is funny. I'm ready to laugh. Now, I probably could have let off with this. I know that you're based in Florida, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you from there originally, or just living there now?
Yeah, I am. I'm from South Florida.
So are you Miami fan generally of their teams, or what's your sports fandom look like?
Well, mostly, but not everything. I'm a big Miami Heat fan.
Nice.
Um, Florida Panthers.
Oh,
Football, I'm actually a New York Giants fan. Although I'm also a Dolphins fan. The Dolphins are my second team.
yeah.
And then baseball, I don't have a team anymore. I grew up a big Marlins fan. We won 2 World
Yeah.
Series, and I went to the one in 2003
Nice.
against the Yankees, which was awesome when I was like 14 years old. And the franchise has just been like since they moved to this new ballpark, and they've been so bad for so long. I just stopped. So
Yeah.
I no longer have a baseball team.
The Marlins to me are the strangest franchise in baseball because they basically, and I don't know how long, they've been around, roughly around 30 years, maybe a little less. And I
Yeah.
would say in 90%, 95% of those seasons, they've been really bad. And then there's this little window, these 2 championship runs that they had, which ultimately ended with them blowing up the team the next offseason. Like it was not some sustainable thing. And it's tough because they've had good players. They had Yelich and they had Stanton and, Ozuna for a while. Like they've had some great pitchers. Yeah, no, it's strange. Well, you're welcome to, and maybe this is a be careful what you wish for thing. You're welcome to adopt the Tigers bandwagon if you want. We do currently have the best record in baseball. So if you jump on now, you're not technically a front runner because we haven't won anything of substance yet.
That's true. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it's like I can't say, "Oh, I'm a Yankees fan now," right? Because
Right.
that's too simple.
Yeah.
That's you
There's
know,
nobody who's a like bandwagon, especially in Detroit. There's not a lot of bandwagon Tigers or
Tigers.
Lions people. Nobody forces themselves to be a Lions fan. You're born into that. Now, last few years, great, like awesome, but there was 60 years of ineptitude before that. You mentioned the Giants just out of curiosity because, like I said, I follow a lot of New York sports. But where do you stand on kind of? It seems like they have a pulse with this offseason again and the draft that they had. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty. Their schedule is brutal, but the way that I view them this year is like there's potential to be bad but fun.
Yeah,
With Russ and Jackson Dart, backing him up and some of the athletes they have. Is that kind of where you stand on them?
absolutely. I just want to see competitiveness this year, progress. I don't with that schedule. I doubt they'll make the playoffs.
It's a
Um,
brutal schedule. Yeah,
It's brutal, and the division's really tough,
yeah,
obviously. But I think they're on the right track now, and I don't really blame the coach. I think Dayball's a good coach.
I do too.
I think they obviously made a big mistake. When they let Barkley go and they signed Daniel Jones, like that
Yeah,
was a bad 1-2 punch there. But they've moved off of Jones now. I think they had a good draft.
yeah, they did.
And I'm optimistic, like every NFL team.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's a strange thing, and I agree with you on Dable. And I mentioned this, I think after you guys beat the Vikings in the playoffs that year, which was sometimes success is not always best for long term plan because I was never a big Daniel Jones guy, and I think a lot of New York fans really weren't. But you have that year where you go to Minnesota, you beat the Vikings. He plays a good game, played well down the stretch, and it was that situation where if we let him walk, it looks bad. But so we kind of have to re-sign him, knowing full well like we're probably not going to get a ton of mileage out of this contract. Now, Saquon going to Philly and having like arguably the greatest running back season ever.
Yeah,
That's tough, and that's that one sticks with him. But also, I still contend paying running backs in the NFL is it's a roll of the dice. I mean, for every Saquon, remember how much like Le'Veon Bell held out about trying to get paid, and he went to New York and was kind of nothing. Like you never really know. But now when
you
it's
never
somebody
know.
you draft, it's a bit tougher.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, I love Barkley, although I just saw he's on the cover of Madden, which could be a curse. So
I, I was thinking about that lately because I think we're close to the same age, but the Madden curse was in the 2000s was a legitimate thing. I remember it probably peaked from like 98 to like 2008 2009. It was like 8 out of 10 where like they had bad years, and it probably peaked with I remember Mike Vick broke his leg in the preseason, and
yeah,
the next year they interviewed him, and he's like, "I'll probably be solid. I'm not on the cover of Madden this year, so I think things will probably work out." I'll have to do a deeper dive into that. I don't think it's been as prevalent with the cursedness over the last decade or so, but I could be wrong about that. I could be. I'd have to check.
yeah. Although last year Christian McCaffrey was on
Okay,
the
so
team.
then you
So
know what? I stand corrected because he
yeah,
got injured. He
yeah,
ended up basically missing the whole year. Yeah. And I love McCaffrey, but he might never be the same again. So yeah, I'll have to take a deeper dive. Um, just on a personal level, because I think I really do. I respect guys like you. I respect grinders, man. I respect people that are putting stuff out there. The internet is not always a kind place. I'm sure that you've learned this, and
yeah.
you've been able to pop off and have success. You brought up the meeting Nick Wright and those guys, but on a personal level, what's been the most gratifying or just coolest moment that you've had where you've kind of had to take a step back and be like, dude, I can't believe this is happening?
Yeah, well, there has been some things. Okay, I was actually at the NBA Finals 2 years ago when the Heat played the Nuggets.
Nice.
I went down to I think it was Game 3, and before the game, I was walking to enter the arena, walking to my seat, and Sirius XM is set up
Mm-hmm.
with Frank Isola and Brian Scalabrine. and I'm walking by them, and I'm like, and Frank Isola recognized me, and he was like, "Come over here," and he just brought me on the show. He's like, put on the headset, and that was like a cool moment where I was like, oh man, I guess people know who I am now. That was like a cool breakthrough. NBA Finals, and this was totally unprompted. I wasn't scheduled to be on
Yeah.
their show or anything. That was like a really cool moment that kind of was like, yeah, I guess I've kind of broken through.
Yeah, and that's dope. But and there's so much randomness to it. Like you never know like how, especially with TikTok, the algorithm being the way it is. You never really know who's going to stumble upon that stuff, but you stay consistent with it, which is what you've done. Like it's going to create great opportunities. Obviously, one of the things that I really like about the sports impressions you do, and this will be the last question here, is that not only do you capture the announcers like cadence and everything, but it's very clear that you are familiar with their game, literally and figuratively, where it's not just like, oh, I saw a few clips of this guy and I'm gonna like you've watched games Kevin Harlan has announced. You've watched shows that Nick Wright has done. So with that said, whether it's Super Bowl, Game 7 of the World Series, Game 7 of the NBA Finals, you got a deciding game for your team. Doesn't matter what team it is. Doesn't matter what sport. You can choose any announcer you want to call that game, play by play. Who are you going with?
Um, do they have to still be active announcers?
No, they can be inactive, or they could even be passed away if you want.
Okay, this is actually kind of tough because I love Marv Albert.
Mm-hmm.
He's still alive. I know he doesn't call games anymore, but having him call any deciding game with my Miami Heat,
Yeah,
that's a great one. Absolutely. And I'm also a big fan of Mike Tirico. I don't have his voice down yet. I've been working on it, but I love listening to Tirico call games too.
yeah. It's interesting you bring up Marv, because there's certain announcers that for whatever reason you just have good luck with them. Like I'm obviously a Michigan fan, and like Gus Johnson's become weirdly kind of divisive over the last several years. But when I think of like us beating Ohio State and us winning the Big Ten, like it's always his voice. So I'm just like, bring him on, like more big noon kickoffs. But it's an interesting. It's tough because very often, and this is a tangent, but the announcers that get criticized the most are the ones that we associate with like the biggest moments. Like the Joe Buck hate for like 2 decades was so prevalent, and now I love Joe Davis, but it took me a minute to be like, Joe Buck's not calling the World Series. Like you do become like bizarrely.
Yeah, well, I still enjoyed the Joe Buck Tim McCarver.
Me too.
Show,
yeah,
and I still miss that. I still feel like I think Joe Davis is good, but him and Smoltz,
mm-hmm.
I don't feel like they have the great chemistry like Buck and McCarver did.
Yeah, and the thing that made them work is the fact that Buck, obviously he came from St. Louis calling games. McCarver, obviously a former player for the Cardinals, so they knew each other like well before they were even calling like World Series games. But I and eventually it's weird how the internet works. Like Joe Buck was like the Nickelback of announcers, where in the last decade now people are like, I actually liked him the whole time. I was just kind of afraid to admit it. Well, look, man, we're gonna link to all your stuff. Not that you need it at this point with the way you're growing, but man, it's an incredible talent you have. And I mean, the gift of being able to be funny is a pretty awesome gift. And I appreciate you doing this on a whim. I literally messaged you 2 days ago to come on here. So we're trying to do, we're about 50 something episodes in. We're trying to do like come up with a tier list for friends of the program. So this is your first time guest. So you're like, you're in the on deck circle. Like you're doing well. You're officially. I appreciate you, but we're going to continue to support your stuff. And I appreciate you coming on the show and being on Chris Company.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, and maybe now I'll be a Tigers fan.
Yeah, hope so. I can never tell how people are going to react. I found that very fascinating. I really enjoyed that. I thought he was, he's a very well spoken guy. Not that I didn't expect that, but I like hearing about the craft and the process. I think sometimes, and look, some people work in coal mines, right? We're not saving the world, but the internet's unforgiving, and we take for granted sometimes how difficult it can be just for people to put themselves out there, and let alone develop a following the way that he has. I'm going to also just throw the tag out there, and I've seen this in his videos before, and say that this episode is sponsored by Mountain Dew because in the background of all his videos is a whole lot of Mountain Dew. I guess that's where he gets the energy from. Hey, good for him, man. There are much worse vices, but no, I appreciate that. I thought that was a lot of fun, and show goes on as we continue to roll with these interviews. We will be back with another one next week. We'll be back to more Detroit-centric. Natalie Kerwin will be joining the program from FanDuel Sports. You've seen her all around with the Pistons. You've seen her do stuff with the Tigers, Red Wings, what have you. We'll be interviewing her. First time on the show. Actually, she interviewed me on opening day. That sounds very pretentious, but she interviewed me on opening day, like 2023. And now the circle has come full. And we will have the opportunity to talk to her. If you got time tonight, Lone Goat, June 6th, if you're watching this, we're there, 5-minute walk to Comerica Park. If you want to stay through the game, you're welcome to. If not, you want to just stop by and say hi. Totally understand. So, yeah, appreciate it. Appreciate Josh coming on. We'll link to all his socials. The support has been incredibly consistent from you guys, and we're trying new things with the pod and with the interviews especially, and I appreciate all of your continued support. And, of course, I appreciate my producer, Austin Sisler, who continues to do a masterful job behind the lens. I will talk to you guys real soon. Thank you again to Josh Rosen. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness.